Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Visconti, for the introduction. It's very much a pleasure for me to be here today to be able to share this work with you, and also an honor to be here with my research mentor. So I spent a year on the ground in Chile as a Dean's Research Scholar and as an Ambassador Brigade Fellow, carrying out this work that was very generously funded by a grant from the Center for Health Equity in the Americas. And today we're going to tell you a little bit about our project work. Dr. Withers actually came down to Chile while I was there. She participated in the project activities, and it was a very, very amazing experience. So just a little bit of overview. So the title of our project is Immigrant Visions and Voices, a Photovoice Exploration of Health in Santiago, Chile. So today we're going to first give an introduction, some background information about immigration in Chile, talk a little bit about our project objectives. Then we'll move on and talk about the development of this project, so the various collaborators involved, our project timeline, the trajectory. And then Dr. Withers will actually talk about the methodology that we used, Photovoice, and the various kind of parts and components of that process. Finally, we'll present some of the results, and the results are actually the photos and narratives that are on exhibit here in the lobby. And then finally, we'll give some conclusions, talk about challenges we face, talk about current and potential next steps. And then we'll invite you all to come and look at the photos a bit more, and we'll be circulating around for discussion, for any questions that you have. So the first thing I want to mention is the difference between the words migrant and immigrant. So migrant is a more general term that refers to somebody who moves within or between countries, whereas immigrant is a bit more specific and refers to an individual who moves to a given country from his or her country of origin. And in this presentation, we use both of these terms because many immigrants actually identify with and use frequently the word migrant to refer to themselves. So a little bit of background. First, to start with geography. Chile is located on the western coast of South America, bordered by Peru, Bolivia, and Argentina. And you see this arrow points to the approximate location of Santiago, the capital, where we carried out this research. Chile has a population of about 18 million people, of which approximately 441,000 are immigrants. So that corresponds to a proportion of immigrants as referencing the total population of 2 to 3%. And so while that number might seem quite low, for example, in comparison to the corresponding number in the United States, which is 13.5%, the rate of immigration in Chile has been skyrocketing, especially over the past 3 decades. And hence a need for research really to examine this phenomenon from multiple perspectives. A few statistics, or I guess facts about the immigrant population in Chile. Majority of immigrants are from Latin American countries. So countries, for example, Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, also from the Caribbean, Haiti, Dominican Republic being the 2 major representatives. Approximately 2/3 of immigrants live in the Santiago metropolitan region, so in the country. And within this region, Recoleta, the district where we carried out this project, has the 3rd largest number of immigrants. So once immigrants arrive in Chile, though they may have access, for example, to education or the public healthcare system, they may experience a particular vulnerability that, when compounded by a series of immigration-associated challenges, can negatively affect their health and well-being. So this generates a need for research examining the lived experience of immigrants in relation to health and well-being to understand what are the problems that they face, what are the needs that they have, and what are some potential areas for intervention. And hence the purpose of our project. So our project had these specific objectives listed here. So 1, to explore the immigrant experience as a social determinant of health. 2, to identify the needs of the specific community that we worked with. And 3, to contribute through the Photovoice process, through exhibitions and presentations like this, to raising awareness and sensitivity among community stakeholders.
Just a question quick. Do they have a distinction like we have in this country, like legal, illegal, documented, undocumented?
So interestingly, in Chile, immigrants are not considered, regardless of their legal status, they're not considered illegal or legal. They're considered regular or irregular. So if you're in an irregular status, you can go through a process to regularize your status, but you're not considered illegal. Generally, that's the case.
Do they have access to services?
So technically, as far as I know in terms of education, I'm not as familiar, but I think that all youth have access to education regardless of where they're from, and you can actually, that's a way to process your visa, is through the educational system for youth. And as of recently, everybody has access, in theory, to the public healthcare system, regardless of their documentation status. So a little bit more about the development of the project. So this was a community-based participatory project with collaborators, including academic institutions, the local government, and also community members and organizations. So the logos you see here are some of our community collaborators, our academic and institutional collaborators. So the project timeline, really the project began with proposals in May 2016. And after the proposal process, we went through ethics approval, received ethics approval from USC, from the University of Chile Faculty of Medicine. And then we went forward with starting to make community contacts. So we got in touch with the local government of the Municipality of Recoleta, which is the district where we worked. And we specifically worked with their Department of Health and their program for migrants and refugees. And what happened was we formed a community advisory board that included members of these local government offices, also included leaders of local migrant organizations. I was on the board, and then some professors and students from the University of Chile School of Public Health. So that happened in October 2016. With this advisory board, we had several meetings to refine the project protocol, to discuss what would be most relevant and valuable to the community of study, and then to work on recruitment of participants for the project. So we recruited in February 2017 15 immigrants. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them in just a few moments. 15 immigrants to participate in this Photovoice project, and from February to July, we carried out the project. So here you'll see in the picture some of our participants. We recruited 15, but 11 remained actively participating throughout the entire process. There were 8 women, 3 men, and they were quite diverse in terms of age. You can see between 18 and 48 years old. We had 6 countries of origin represented, the major immigrant groups in Chile, and also diversity in terms of the time that they've spent living in Chile, so from 9 months to 17 years.
Okay, so my turn. I'm going to talk a little bit about Photovoice methodology. It's great to see so many people here and so many familiar faces, so thanks for coming. I know Photovoice is kind of a hot topic these days, and there's a lot of interest in the methodology. So we thought that we wanted to kind of, and as an academic institution, we wanted to tell you about the entire process. It's quite challenging, and as Justin will talk to you a little bit later, time-consuming, and it's so it requires a lot of thought, and there's a whole process. So that's kind of why we thought we'd include this part. So Photovoice is a participatory research methodology, and basically it's used especially. It's relevant for vulnerable populations, for marginalized populations who often don't have a voice, and it's a way to empower these communities to be able to articulate their needs, to express their opinions, and to be able to engage then with stakeholders through taking photos and through a narrative. So it has the empowerment component, and it has an advocacy component in addition to the research component. So it's a really cool methodology, and it's quite flexible. It's been used and adapted in a wide variety of settings and for a lot of different topics. And so we're going to talk about our process generally, and then go into more detail specifically about the workshops. An important part of the process is the facilitation throughout the process, so the engagement of the participants with the facilitators. So the origin of Photovoice, so it was developed 20-something years ago by Carolyn Wang and Mary Burris for a study of reproductive health needs in China. And it was kind of not intuitive that they were going to use these photos, which often didn't reflect anything related to reproductive health, as a way to promote reproductive health in this community, a rural community in China. But what was really, I think, important and instrumental in that process is more of the empowerment piece, that the women themselves that participated in the project felt that they had a voice. And so we wanted also to use this methodology in that way. So why Photovoice? Well, some of it I just told you. It's a great tool for marginalized communities. It's a great qualitative research tool. It also helps people through the process of facilitation and engaging in the community, learn more about their community and become stronger members and more connected to their communities. And in addition, so there's community conversation, but there's also the ability to reach stakeholders in a really meaningful and engaging way that's quite unique to this methodology. So our process, the overview of our process is basically we, as Justin mentioned, there was a community advisory board, CAB, that was set up, and they helped to recruit participants and help to kind of discuss the research question and the objectives of the project. And then there were some workshops that were held. So there were 3 facilitators that actually worked directly with the participants. So Justin, and then there were 2 other facilitators from the University of Chile who were master's students in public health, and Gina and Jacqueline. And so I was able to go down to Santiago in November and work with the team and do the trainings of the facilitators and of the CAB in order for them to get a sense of what it was going to be like for participants and what kind of participants were going to be most effective in this approach. So with the participants, there were workshops that talked about the methodology, about the main research question and objectives. They even reviewed photography techniques. And then they actually carried out the photography part where they were in the field, so to speak, with their cameras taking photos. And then they put narratives to the photos, because also an important part of Photovoice is not to just display photos. Because you could see a photo, and maybe you'll see some out there. Without the narrative, it's like, what is that, right? It really has no meaning behind it, or it's open to interpretation. And really the point is to understand the meaning from the participants' perspectives and to figure out, to learn about why they chose that photo as a way to reflect whatever the theme that they're trying to convey. And then also through a series of meetings with facilitators and in the group sessions, the small group meetings with all of the participants and facilitators, they kind of narrowed down the themes and which photos they wanted to convey those themes. And then the final part, which is sort of the voice part, is to use these photos just like we're doing here in exposition with key stakeholders. And so there have been a number of these expositions held, one at the Ministry of Health in Chile, one with a municipality, and one at the University of Chile, and now here at Keck. So what's, I think, really cool is that at every exposition in Chile, at least one of the participants, and often many of the participants, were there to engage with the people that were coming to look at their photos and talk to them more about that. And so they got to tell their own stories. Okay, so the workshop, what did the workshop look like? So there were different blocks, and you could see it was a full and packed day. And so we talked about, let's start with the activity. So the workshop is an introduction to the methodology, talking about the research question. Then they came up with talking about telling stories and how to use photos to tell those stories. And then we based this training on a Rutgers guide. So we adapted it, and Justin spent a lot of time on that, adapting it and translating it in order to make it relevant for that local context. And so in the next few slides, we wanted to highlight some aspects of the training so you can get a sense of what it was like. So, workshop preview. So the discussion and development of the research question was obviously very crucial. So after doing some icebreaker activities, letting them get to know each other a little bit better and talking about the method, they worked directly with the participants to develop a research question that reflected what they thought was important. So it was related to health, but it was also related to their lived experiences as migrants. And so it was kind of a broader question. And then this research question, the development, was crucial because it really then guided the rest of the project, from taking the photos to choosing the photos, putting in narratives with the photos. And so it was really essential for everyone to understand from the start, be on the same page about what the research question was. So in addition to defining the primary question, there were some secondary questions, like what are the strengths of your community? What are the challenges or weaknesses in your community? What would you like to change? Those types of questions, which you can see here. And those questions help give them a little bit more direction in terms of what photos they might want to take. And also to understand kind of the overall objectives or themes of this project. And so we also talked with them, with the CAB, and then ultimately with the participants about key concepts like what is lived experience, what is well-being, because those might be different from one person to the next. And so we also wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page. But interestingly, the conceptualization of these terms really evolved throughout the project, right? As people started becoming even more familiar with the strengths and challenges of their community through this process, it really did evolve, which I think is also really interesting. And so they really, I think, gradually came to understand health and well-being as more than just access to health care. Feel free to jump in. Okay, so we're going to show you a slide from a section of the presentation and the training that addressed how to transmit messages through photography. And I actually learned a lot in doing the training with the facilitator myself about photography. And so this related to, basically there are two ways that you can transmit a message, through reality or through symbolism. And so reality is when the photo shows something real that's actually happening. So for example, if you were talking about this photo, what might the reality be in this photo? Trash, homeless, I think someone said. Okay, something like that. Poverty, someone digging through the trash, right? Or issues of trash collection or something. But symbolism is when the photo then represents something, such as a feeling, a theme, or an idea. So what might this photo represent in terms of symbolism? Isolation. What else? Desperation. Okay, yeah, so it could be you feel like garbage when you are a migrant and you're completely ignored from society, or the feeling of being kind of thrown away or discarded, something like that. You can't get a decent job, and so you're just kind of marginalized. So those are some ideas. And so after reviewing this concept with them, they discussed how they could use the two different techniques to deliver messages in their photos. And so this slide is from the photography techniques part of the training. And in other words, how we take photos, how the way that the photo is taken really affects its appearance, but also the way that the viewer interprets that photo. And so, and the meaning that it has behind it. So angle was one of several components that we talked about and we reviewed in helping them to think about how they could make their photos more meaningful, and again, how they could make them more powerful and to convey this idea. And so what is the effect? So there are two photos here. So in the top photo, what do you think the angle, what do you think that might represent?
Volume, the amount of people.
Okay, the amount of people.
Repetition.
Other thoughts?
Different ages.
Okay, different ages. Yeah, so you can see it's generally a bunch of people eating, right? But you could also think of it as a collective activity, something, community. People are doing it together, for example, versus just taking a photo, focusing on the one person. And what about the bottom? This is the photo we actually showed. So what about the bottom photo? What is the focus from the angle?
Movement.
Okay, movement. Balance. Yeah, okay. So because the angle is really focusing on the legs and the feet versus just taking a photo of the entire person walking, the meaning could be more about a journey or moving forward, something like that, balance, something like that. So it's very, the angle is very different than if you take the photo focused, say, on the subject's face or from far away, right? So those are just some examples. And then the next was individual meetings. So after they started taking photos, Justin met with the participants to review photos, to provide guidance, to kind of talk it out, help them brainstorm about other ideas or ways that they could take photos to convey the message that they wanted to convey. And so after about a month of taking photos, they were asked to select 15 of all the photos that they took that they felt were more powerful and addressed the research question. And then they brought these photos to an individual meeting and met one-on-one with the facilitator to kind of talk through again the photos and to write narratives. What is the meaning to them? Why is that photo important? And then through this process, they then narrowed those down to 7 photos, which they took to the larger group meeting. And so in the process of writing narratives, the facilitators started out with an open-ended question like, tell me about this photo. And then they really were able to kind of hone in and help them to convey in a powerful way through the photo and the narrative what was important to them. So then there were 2 group meetings, and the participants all brought their 7 photos, and they were divided into a couple of groups, and then they used the pile sorting technique. So they went through all the photos of everyone together and sorted them into kind of groups or categories and what matched in what. And these categories were ultimately used to organize the photos in the exhibition and to really come up with the results. So after everyone sorted them, it's like, what are the themes that emerged? What are the categories? You had a lot of photos that reflected one theme. What is that and why is it important? So a certain number of photos were from each category then were selected for the exhibition so that you have several photos that illustrate each of the main categories and that emerged. And so there were about 80 photos that underwent this categorization process. Of those, 54 were shown in the exhibits in Chile, and here we have 31 of the 54 photos on display in the 8 categories.
Okay, so the results, basically the results are kind of this whole process. The photos and the narratives are the results, and the analysis of photos and narratives actually took place through these various stages. So the process of selection, these criteria that we had when we asked the participants, choose the photos that best respond to our research question, that convey the messages you want to convey, and that represent the diversity of experiences of immigrants in relation to health and well-being in your community. And so that selection process was part of their analysis. Writing of the narratives and the discussion that took place while writing those narratives was also part of the analysis. And then the categorization process, the group process, and then the final selection of photos for the exhibitions. So the categories that they came up with are these 8, and you'll see that the photos here are organized kind of in clusters, and they're organized by category. And each category actually has a summary of the major themes of the photos and narratives that belong to it. So the 8 categories were healthcare, basic needs, adaptation as a migrant and social integration, social relationships and support networks, stigma and discrimination, social vulnerability, environment, and aspirations. And importantly, throughout this entire process, obviously it can be a bit overwhelming for the participants. They're hearing about photography techniques, they're trying to figure out how to work a camera, they're dealing with also ethical considerations. Okay, can I take a photo of this person's face? Do I need to get consent? Do I not? And also just the fear of approaching somebody in public, for example, if they were not taking a photo of themselves or in their houses, the fear of embarrassment or the fear of talking with somebody or bringing up issues that could be sensitive. And so these were kind of the categories that they came up with, and they helped them to really kind of narrow down and focus in on what were the major themes and what were kind of the experiences that were shared among them, and so that they could represent those experiences through the exhibition of photos. So here we have a mosaic of all the photos that are on exhibit here. So these are the 31. And we hope that you all take the time maybe after to look at some of the photos if you haven't already. But we are going to read the narratives of one photo from each category, just so you get a little taste of what they're like. And just as a kind of a disclaimer, all of the narratives are written in Spanish, the native language of the majority of our participants, except for one Haitian participant. But he spoke some Spanish and French, and we had a facilitator who spoke French and Spanish, so that worked. So we're going to read those to you. So we did the translations, but sometimes, as you might know, it's hard to really capture the style and the emotion of the kind of the original voice. We did our best. Okay, so this is a photo in the category of healthcare. Some time ago, my daughter got sick, and we received the necessary medical care for her recovery. I felt good because regardless of our insurance status and financial situation, she received treatment. This was a huge relief and made me feel that health professionals care about saving lives and are not solely interested in money. I was worried that they would not take care of her, and we were very distressed by her symptoms. My wife and I had to ask what to do because her papers were incomplete. I hadn't registered her in the public healthcare system at the local clinic because initially I didn't have the necessary information, and once I did, I still didn't do so. Thus, when she got sick, I was extremely worried, but it gave me peace of mind to see the good care that she received. So I like this narrative because it's very positive, and it expresses kind of a real worry and a real lived experience of a person. This was actually happened during the photography period, and this participant took this photo. Again, one of the strengths of this methodology, you can capture moments that probably, for example, as an interviewer, we could never capture. So it's very positive. And so we didn't just focus on problems, but we also focused on assets. and looking at the positive and how can we promote positive things in the community. At the same time, I think it's also interesting to mention that when this photo came up in our group discussion, we were talking about it, some of the other participants said, but this hasn't been my experience. I had an extremely negative experience. When I was pregnant, I went to the hospital. They refused to take care of me unless I paid at the start before receiving any treatment. And so really through the discussion and group process, you kind of were able to gain the diversity of experiences. So that's one thing. You could see one photo and think that that perspective represents a perspective of everybody, but it's not necessarily the case. So I think that's something that's interesting and important to mention.
Okay, so this is the category of basic needs. I can't read that because of the glare. So one night there was a fire in a building where many families lived together. And it made me reflect upon the fact that not all of us are fortunate enough to be able to have our own house. Generally, we must share a room with someone whom we don't know, as it's our only option. Usually, as migrants, we have to look for cheaper places, and many take advantage of our lack of familiarity with currency and living conditions because we are new here. The houses generally aren't in good condition, and the rooms that landlords construct inside are of poor quality. Where I live, there are 5 families in the house. It's not very pleasant to be among so many people because we all need some personal space and comfort. I've been looking for a more comfortable place, searching for other houses, but I haven't found one. They're very expensive, so we don't have any other choice but to stay where we are.
So that was basic needs. This one is in the category of adaptation as a migrant and integration. I want to show the long trips that I have to take almost every day in the metro. I carry my backpack with me and it's very heavy. Often I have to set it down to rest a bit, but doing so worries me. If I were to lose it, I don't know what I would do because everything that I own is in there. The yellow line in this photo symbolizes the sensation of restriction that we feel as migrants in Chile. There are so many rules and regulations that we must comply with, and if you don't, there's a price to pay. In this situation, the bureaucracy's monetary interest, for example in collecting fines, supersedes any attempt to understand the reason behind a failure to comply. For example, the high cost of documentation procedures, or the excessive paperwork and red tape involved in the process. This situation makes me feel always like an outsider, not a citizen, and also vulnerable, because I can neither complain nor demand that they respect my rights. If I were to do so, I could be reprimanded by the authorities. They treat foreigners differently than Chilean citizens.
This is from the category Social Relationships and Support Networks. And the narrative says, seeing my room like this fills me with positive feelings, making my days happier, because every small detail has meaning. They are gifts from friends and family. When I left my country and arrived in Chile, I began to miss them. Obviously, I was missing them a lot, but at the same time, each word or expression of support that they shared with me gave me the strength to continue my life in Chile and not be brought down by the sadness.
So that one was in Social Relationships and Support Networks. This is from Stigma and Discrimination. Skin color at times limits not only employment opportunities, but also affects you when you're out in public. Many people don't know how it is, how people treat you in the street. Some insult you, they get angry. It's difficult to hear, you dirty black, or what are you doing here stealing work from the Chileans? It hurts, it makes you want to cry, feel like they kicked you. You feel like garbage. When this happens, you ask yourself, what am I doing in a place where I'm not wanted? It would be good if everybody realized that our social environment can dramatically affect our health too. Not everybody discriminates like this. There are also people in this country who are sincere and compassionate, caring about fellow human beings regardless of where they're from. People should realize that if there wasn't a need, we wouldn't leave our countries to come to Chile. Right now, there's a lot of migration, and thus racial and cultural mixing will inevitably occur. So something interesting about this photo, obviously the face is blurred. So the photographer or participant who took this photo, she had written, signed, informed consent to show the face of this woman. But the thing is that later she wrote the narrative, and she didn't have consent for the narrative specifically, and it could present a situation that could be harmful to the woman. So with Photovoice, you have to be very sensitive to these issues. Obviously, there are a lot of ethics involved, and you need to really consider this in making decisions about what photos to publish. And some participants, they forgot to get consent or they felt embarrassed to do so, and in the end we couldn't use those photos.
Can I ask you a question? Was there like an unanticipated consequence of having, I mean, there's a level of anonymity I see in that. Did that affect how people felt when they saw that? Did it add to the
Definitely, I think it does. It adds a different aspect, a different kind of interpretation, or conveys a little bit of a different meaning. And so I think one other thing I want to mention is that we have a video. It's only in Spanish. We don't have subtitles yet in Spanish or English. But this woman who wrote this narrative and took this photo, she actually talks more. She elaborates. Her voice is recorded, and she elaborates about this experience, and it's very powerful. It almost brought me to tears. It was hard to read this even in English, but very moving. And something else really interesting before we move forward, so some people might wonder, okay, well, you have all these photos, you have a picture of somebody's bedroom with some decorations. How is that related to health? So we always brought everything back to this research question of health and well-being, and a lot, like we'll mention in the conclusion, is related to one's mental health and the psychosocial stress that they experience as an immigrant, and that has huge impacts, especially when it occurs over a long period of time, not only on mental and emotional health, which is kind of perhaps maybe the most obvious impact, but also on physical health.
And also to be able to see health as more than, as I mentioned before, just lack of access to care.
I have kind of a general question. Do you guys consider, either when you're recruiting the participants or throughout the process, why they moved to Chile in the first place, whether it was under more positive or negative circumstances?
That's a good question. When we were recruiting, we didn't specifically recruit based on that factor. People came to Chile for various reasons. Generally, one of the most common reasons for immigration is for economic reasons, for experiences of poverty, for example, or not, a lack of opportunities for oneself or one's family. But we'll also kind of mention a little bit in terms of aspirations, kind of what motivations are for coming to Chile. But there are also people coming as refugees and asylum seekers, people who are victims of maybe political violence, for example. It very much depends on the country of origin. And unfortunately, we didn't have any participants from Venezuela, but there are many Venezuelans coming to Chile in this time. And they have a unique situation. We did interviews with some of them as another part of the project, and it's quite distinct and impactful.
So we specifically wanted to use the method of a maximum variation in this study to really be able to capture a range of experiences. So as Justin mentioned, you see they came from different countries, different ages, different amounts of time living in Chile. Some were married, some weren't, some had families, some didn't. So it was a whole range of experiences, but also through all of the facilitated discussions and to be able to capture that lived experience as a migrant in Santiago. Questions?
Yes, I wondered if you could define or tell us how did you make a distinction between narrative and story? How did you define the idea of a narrative? What is that? What was that you talked about?
So it was a pretty open process. We didn't go too much into the specifics of it. We just said, tell us about this photo. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the way of doing it. So the word in Spanish that we use pretty frequently was relato. It's like relating a story. And so that was kind of the word we used pretty consistently, because narrativa it has a little bit of a different context or a different connotation. And so most of the participants, when we talked about it, they also used that word relato. And so we kind of took their word and we used it with them.
Also, just a point, because we talked about this numerous times in our conversations, is that often at the beginning, before you start the facilitation, the narrative that the participant wants to put is, this photo is of my neighbor walking down the street. And that's not helpful, really, in terms of conveying the meaning. So that's why the facilitation and this process of multiple iterations and multiple sessions with the facilitator and as a group was so important.
Were there any specific types of photos that you said these should not be taken, or any restrictions given to the participants?
And so in the workshop, we had a whole section kind of on what are the things that what are the benefit, the pros and cons of this methodology, and what are the situations in which we might want to refrain from taking a photo, and those in which it might be appropriate to take a photo. So we actually did some exercises. We presented them with scenarios. For example, you go to the doctor's office for a medical appointment and you see a pregnant woman sitting in the waiting room and you want to take a picture of her. What do you do? And there are a lot of different discussions about what you would do in that situation. Some people actually, there's one photo right here in healthcare. Somebody went to a hospital and they took a photo just of a dark hallway. But they tell the story and the narrative of the woman that they talked with. They asked her about her life, and I think that's also one of the really unique things about Photovoice is that it inspires people to talk, to connect with each other. And so this woman, our participant, I guess, went up to another woman, a pregnant patient woman, and said, tell me about your experience, like I'm working on this project, and we're trying to understand the experiences of immigrants here. And so we talked about strategies. So for example, if somebody, first of all, never to take a photo of somebody without their consent if their face is being shown. We have a whole section on consent and ethics. But then, for example, let's say that I approach you and I want to take a photo of you and you say, no, I'm not interested, I'm sorry. Well then, what are some alternatives? Okay, well, maybe I want to tell your story. I feel like your story is really impactful and relevant to this project and to our community, like experiences of health in our community. So how about if you walk down the street and I'll take a picture of you from behind from a distance? Or if you're like, no, I'm still not comfortable with that, okay, well, let me think of a symbol that I could use to represent your experience. And so you'll see, for example, there's a woman who takes a photo of a candle, and she talks about how the candle symbolizes the journey of the hope that many immigrants have when they come to Chile. So we kind of armed them with many strategies to be able to do so, and it was very much a process. They came to me, many very disheartened during the process, and they said, but when I ask people to take photos, they just tell me no, and I don't know what to do, and I'm being nice, and the conversation's great, but then they won't let me take a photo. And then we talked about, okay, well, what else could we do? And then through that process, they kind of evolved in their ability to think about how to frame a photo to really convey a meaning. And that just because they couldn't take a face shot, a portrait shot of a person, it doesn't mean that everything kind of, went to the wayside.
Okay, also I think they start taking their role as like a leader, right, and a voice for their community quite seriously, which I think is also a really interesting part of this process. Okay, so moving on, this comes from the theme of social vulnerability, and it says, this photo deals with the theme of intimate partner violence, rape being the specific word in this case. It happened to her, and initially she avoided talking about it because at the time her parents were very conservative. Eventually she had the courage to face what had happened, to overcome her pain, and to move forward with her life. I took this photo because I want people to understand that it's very difficult psychologically to recover from something like this. You say, it happened a long time ago, but in reality, something like this marks you and stays with you for life. Not any woman can recover and move forward with her life. One has to continue fighting. She decided to move from another country, recover, become a parent, and deal with her pain once and for all. In this process, you have to go out and make a life for yourself. Never isolate yourself and actively look for ways to recover. Migration has made her stronger and was a part of this journey.
So this photo in the category of environment. I decided to take this photo since it shows how people living in the streets, or even those who have their own homes, don't put out their garbage properly. The piles of trash don't look good, and when the people living in the area open their doors or windows, the smell is very unpleasant. The situation creates tension among community members. Additionally, one can note a lack of solidarity and pride among them for the place where they live. There are people, both migrants and Chileans, who are homeless and live in the streets, and some of what is thrown out could in some way be useful to them. I think that there should be greater consciousness regarding the things that we decide to throw in the street. It could be another solution, for example, giving the reusable things to people who need them most. In this way, we could avoid this situation. So you'll see, like, there are a variety of styles and a variety of ways of sharing. Some photos tell the story of somebody else. Some photos kind of give a general perspective. Some photos talk about an individual opinion. And I think that diversity really kind of enriches the results that you get with the Photovoice project.
And this is the final theme of aspirations. And the narrative says, all of us have goals as human beings. As migrants upon arriving in this country, we want to have a better life. When we have a goal, it doesn't matter if the journey is difficult. We can't give up. We have to continue looking for happiness. Many migrants come because they seek a good job and a place to live. At the beginning, it's very difficult. The form of speaking, the environment, the culture. It's hard for all of us to get accustomed to these things, but it is always possible to take the right path and continue moving forward. A better life is also a life without violence and in which money is not a problem.
So those are some of our photos, and then Dr. Wu is going to give some summary points.
So some of the key points from this project are really that the migrants come with kind of similar to here, right? A dream of a better life for themselves and their families. The support networks are really crucial in terms of integration and adaptation to life in Chile. And it helps them not only with the logistical or practical aspects, such as finding work, but also with the social isolation and loneliness that they feel. In addition, they may find it difficult to satisfy basic needs, especially at the beginning. Certainly, they talked about discrimination in various forms, whether it's just insults or problems with physical violence, and also they talk about the violence and discrimination in contexts like in housing, in the workplace, etc. And then in terms of healthcare, as Justin mentioned, there's a variability of experiences, both positive and negative. And some of the key factors which influence our access to healthcare included economics, ability to communicate in Spanish, support networks, access to information, and documentation status. So very similar to here.
So basically, our conclusions are that the immigrant experience is most definitely a social determinant of health, but that it's dependent upon the conditions that an immigrant encounters in the country of reception. So if an individual has support networks, has access to this critical information about, for example, registering in the public healthcare system, if they have a connection to be able to find a decent job where they don't experience exploitation, if they find a safe neighborhood to live in, these are all factors, their experiences of discrimination, all factors that influence how the kind of immigrant experience affects their health. And as we mentioned before, one of the key kind of conclusions in a thread that runs through a lot of these photos and narratives is this theme of vulnerability and psychosocial stress, that a lot of times these individuals have very minimum control. As you heard the one woman say, I can't demand that they respect my rights. I can't escape a situation of abuse in the workplace because I need the job to survive. So also things that immigrants experience in many different parts of the world, and that can really have a toll on health and well-being over the short term and over the long term. So these are some recommendations we came up with based on the problems, needs, assets identified in this project. So first, it's very important to implement strategies to promote the fulfillment of immigrant rights in relation to work and housing, so that these people, at the end of the month, they should receive their paycheck if they're working. They should be they shouldn't be taken advantage of in housing situations and forced to live in precarious housing. Another thing is the support networks. Support networks are crucial, particularly at the community level. So there are a number of community organizations and religious institutions, and also at the local government level. There a variety of options that we could connect immigrants to enhance the support that they receive. And along these lines, that districts that don't already have an office, an immigrant office, should create an office to provide that support and facilitate integration and adaptation. Similarly, information dissemination should be a key part of this process. A lot of people don't know what their rights are. They don't know they can register for public health care, where they do it, how they do it, and how to demand that their rights are respected. And also basic orientation, for example, about living in Chile. So one of the huge problems they had in Chile when I was leaving, which was during the winter, is that a lot of Haitian immigrants specifically had never experienced winter before in their lives. So they came to Chile not knowing. They're living in a small room constructed in a courtyard of a giant house that's made of just wooden planks. They don't have blankets, they don't have jackets, they don't have heating. And many, actually there were reports in the news of Haitians dying from hypothermia. So this very basic information that you would think that would be conferred, that people come and they just don't know, they've never experienced it before in their lives. So I think that basic information is crucial. Also, implementation of educational programs, for example, in schools that are sensitive to language and cultural differences. And the consideration of multiculturality and the inclusion of community members in the development of policies and programs that are occurring at the local, not only the local level, but the national level as well. Next step, so our current kind of next steps are that we are looking through evaluations of this whole project, of this process. I met with many members of our team, our research team, our community advisory board, and with Dr. Withers, and we talked about what did we do well, what could we have done better, and what are suggestions for future research along these lines. We also just recently administered an empowerment assessment to the participants. So as Dr. Withers mentioned, empowerment is a crucial aspect of Photovoice, and so we wanted to see, well, how did that affect them in the process? So we're in the kind of process of analyzing those results still. And that empowerment assessment was designed based on the literature using these domains that are listed here. Could be a whole other talk. And then for future efforts, collaboration to address one of the identified problems or needs from this project could be something that we could partner with. For example, with the municipality, this picture on the bottom is the municipality that we worked with, the local government building, their Department of Health. And so we already created this community through Photovoice, and it actually made me very sad to leave, because I feel like we could keep going with this momentum, we could keep building and doing something else. But there are opportunities for future intervention. And here, so
I forced them to put this in.
there are many, many challenges, so I thought I wouldn't write out so many lines and descriptions of what they were. Here I just have some kind of keywords listed, and if you're very interested in the challenges, come and talk to me. If anybody wants to hear particularly about one or two of them, let me know now. Anybody has a particular interest in hearing about one or two of these challenges, you can pick whichever one.
Maybe
Like
the
Jeopardy.
most challenging and how you overcame the biggest challenge.
The biggest challenge. I think really when you're doing community-based work, I didn't know beforehand how much of an effort it really requires. So not only putting together all these workshops, not only kind of the theoretical researcher portion of this project, but coordinating all the people involved, and not only coordinating them, but inspiring people and building consensus towards this effort that you're really trying to help people. You're trying to help people, but really bringing everybody together and motivating them and saying, okay, like let's get this done, because people say, yeah, we're on board, great, let's collaborate. But then it's like, okay, well, when the day comes when you're scheduling your workshops, are people going to be there? Who's going to reserve the room? Who's going to buy the food? Who is going to make sure the security will let you into the local government building? It's all these things. So my Spanish is pretty decent. I can speak fluently, and I gave a lot of these workshops in Spanish, but I don't necessarily have a formal education in Spanish. Most I just learned through speaking. And so I can give a presentation, but for example, if I'm to write a report or make a formal presentation, the grammar, the structures aren't necessarily perfect. They're understandable, but they're not perfect. And so a lot of times we worked with like our facilitators to translate the workshops. The one workshop that Dr. Withers talked about was over 100 slides, so translation, the review of all of those, all of the facilitation meetings. So outside of actually having activities with the participants, having these meetings with our facilitators before to prep, to go through facilitator training, having meetings with the community advisory board to say, okay, we just thought about how we're going to recruit participants. What do you guys think about this? That's not going to work. Okay, tell us what's going to work. Let's go. Let's go that way. And then going back and forth, and it's really a strength, but at the same time a challenge, because in the end you come out with a product that's very much relevant, and that people feel more on board because they have contributed to this whole process. But at the same time, coordinating everybody. We had on the community advisory board 8 or 9 people. And so from community organizations, local government, academia, students. And so I was at the center of all of it. And it was amazing, an amazing experience. But I think that was the biggest challenge, the coordination, the motivation, the consensus building.
And I have to say, Justin is probably one of the most ambitious students I've ever worked with. When he came to me, to work out the project, I was like, okay, take about a quarter of that and double the time, and that's what so even with his description here, he's really, I think, minimizing how challenging this project was.
It was very funny because I came to Dr. Withers and I said, okay, if we're going to do the Photovoice, we'll have the Photovoice all done by December 2016. then we'll design an intervention, we'll do the intervention, we'll evaluate it, everything will be written up, ready to go. And she was like, I think it's a little much. And I was like, but let's just be optimistic. And she was like, well, okay, let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Very patient.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
For you, how was it you supervising, this work from a distance? And because I know you were here and you went there, but how did you coordinate all that to the benefit of many of our faculty?
Yeah. So I had worked with Justin before, so I was confident that that we worked well together, and he would be able to. He's super proactive and hardworking. It was very resource intensive on my part. I'm not gonna lie. It required a lot of teleconferences and a lot of back and forth, and I think he was being pulled also in a couple of directions because I was saying that's not going to work, and the local people were saying yes, we want to do it this way. So it was a lot of work. It was, and it was 10 times or 100 times more work on his part. He was really good about reaching out when he needed help or to talk something out. So being proactive, I think, on the part of the student was crucial. But yeah, it was a hard project.
One of the challenges I always found that wasn't quite on your list is the unintended consequences of what I do. And I find that's a really useful thing to learn from. Were there unintended consequences in this?
I mean, as far as I know, no. I mean, I think one thing that was very crucial is what we did at the end, where we sat down with the people and we said, what did we do well and what didn't we do so well? I mean, there are always things that we can improve upon, and I think that showed a certain sensitivity, because I think if you come in and you say, yeah, we have all the answers, we're coming from academia, we know what's going on. I think it's going to be very hard, and it's kind of an elitist perspective. Something very interesting, I was putting together a poster for the project, and I asked the 2 government collaborators, I was like, oh, could you tell me if you have any letters or your title to put next to your name? And they said, Justin, we have degrees in the experience of life. They're like, our system does not work like that. Like in Chile, they don't really put PhD or MA or MPH, and so I was like, okay. And it's kind of a very humbling moment. And we actually talked at the end about all these cultural differences, but I think really one of the key portions of this project, which is actually a lot of additional work, but it's central to this project, is appreciation for an acknowledgement for everybody that was involved. So we designed certificates of participation that were very official. All of our team in the Center for Health Equity knows that process. And we had signatures from somebody from the Department of Health. We had the director, we had signatures from KEC, from various leaders at KEC. We had signature of the Dean of the School of Public Health in Chile. And so I think and we acknowledged all of these people in our presentations and our exhibitions. And I think that's a really, really key component, because they're central players in this effort. And to say, you know, yes, this is, some people be like, oh, this is your project. Like, no, this is, I'm part of this project. This is our project. This is their work. This is their, you know, their photos and their narratives. So I think that's, yeah, probably the key point. You have to be very careful, as we said, with the photos, with publishing photos. And there were even some things, for example, there was one photo of a man that we don't have on display here, but a man in his apartment, and he said something about how the living conditions were horrible, there were cockroaches, and he felt that's detrimental to health, like the dirtiness of these places, that they're not maintained. And so she had consent, the photographer, to show his face, but then we had to think about, okay, well, you know, if these are on display in public or on the internet, and his landlord sees this photo, it could affect him. So you have to be very, very careful. Very, very careful. Yeah, and so lastly, I just want to acknowledge, and really, I'm extremely grateful to all of the people listed here. It shows how huge of an effort this was. To all of our collaborators at KEC, the Center for Health Equity for funding this project, the University of Chile for receiving me with open arms, even though I'm not officially a student there. My family and friends. Actually, we have some people today, my brother and his girlfriend, who helped me mount all these photos that we have here today. So we were cutting foam board and mounting photos, and I'm very thankful for their practical and emotional support in the process. All of our volunteers, you see, we had many student volunteers who contributed their time. Really, the facilitators were volunteers. We had many, many people contributing to this effort, so I'm extremely grateful. And for Dr. Withers, her patience with me and helping me, pushing me to learn on my own, but then helping me even when I would fall down. Lastly, we want to say that we're going to have all the photos uploaded and narratives on this website, so you'll eventually be able to access all of them. We also have a project video, as I said, it's only in Spanish at this point, which will also be accessible on that website. And we're going to be moving that exhibit over to the Hoffman building, which is on the main HSC campus, right across from the pharmacy building. I don't know if you know it. There's a newly redesigned first floor, and we're going to put the photos over there. Our contact information, and if you have any additional questions, we'll take those. We want to give you some time to look at the photos, and we'll be there to circulate.